All right. Well, welcome to our discussion of the nature of Shemitah, the sabbatical year. We know that every 7 years in Israel is supposed to have sabbatical year where the land is not worked. You cannot work the land. You cannot make money off the land. You can eat whatever you want. You can go to this. You can go to a tree. You can pluck things off. You can do a little reaping for yourself. But that's about it. And then, of course, for practical ramifications today, exactly how it works, et cetera, et cetera. But we're interested in some more theoretical question. What's the nature of this law? What is it similar to? What does it have an affinity to? Is it more similar to Shabbos? Because after all, every 7 years, the land rests. Sounds like Shabbos. You have 6 years, work, 1 year, no work. Is it more similar to the Jubilee year? Is it more similar to the Jubilee year? The slaves go free, so it's a little different. Is that what it's about? Is it about the workers, or is it about the land itself? Is it more like Shabbos, or is it more like Yontif? Is there some similarity to Yontif? And what has Yontif got to do with it? Pesach, Shavuos, Sukkot, what do they have to do with that? Is that connected somehow to that? Is it more of a holiday, like a Shabbos, or is it more of an ethical law? It's more similar to charity, because in the 7th year, I'm this big wealthy landowner, and usually I get to reap my thousands of tomatoes and sell them and make a fortune. And now some poor guy who owns nothing, he can come and pick as many tomatoes as he wants. He has as many tomatoes as I do. So it's sort of an equalizing. Is it more about charity? Is it more about the slave taking a year off? So let's take a look. And the way to do that, as very often is the case, is you go through the Torah. There's so many cases where the Torah talks about the Shemitah, the sabbatical year, and let's see what's the placement. Where is it discussed? What does it seem? How does the Torah frame it? How does the Torah seem to put these laws? Is it in the laws of charity, in the laws of holidays, laws of Shabbos, Jubilee, land, something to do with land? So let's take a look. Then we'll look at some of the rabbis and how they view it as well. And throughout the process of looking at the verses, we want to understand how the rabbis read these verses as well. So let's go. So what's the Sphard-Beth and Chaber? Number one, you can't subvert the rights of your needy in their disputes. You be careful with the poor people. Can't subvert justice. Stay away from false matters. Don't lie. Nakiv tzadik al tarog. Don't kill the wrong person in the court. Lo atzdik rasha. I'm not gonna be gentle on those who are wicked. Don't take bribery. It gives the reason for it. Ger lo tilchatz. Don't oppress the stranger. I'm sorry. Don't oppress the stranger because you know the stranger. You know the soul of the stranger because you used to be strangers too in the land of Egypt. So here we are, hey Dan. Here we are talking about ethical laws, not oppressing those who are landless, those who are poor, those who are strangers, like you were strangers in Egypt. And then, in the context of that, it describes the Shemitah. Again, we're trying to understand what's the context and what's the framing of the idea of the sabbatical year. And 6 years you shall plant the land and gather the crops. And the 7th, you should hold back, leave it, and let the poor people eat. And everything else, the animals in the field can eat it. That's what you should do, even to your vineyards, even to your olive trees. Forget about it. There's no reaping, there's no selling, there's no buying. There's just an open market, free for all. Anybody can take the as much as they'd like. So, so there it is. We have a context of ethical preachings. In other words, the Shemitah is completely about the poor. It's about Evionei Amecha, the poor people. The chapter starts, you should lend money to the poor, and it ends off every 7 years, just give everything to the poor. Anything you got, you can keep it. You can have some apples, and everybody who wants to come in your field can also have apples. It's for the poor people. And the next verse is kind of hard to know what it's talking about. It says 6 days you should work, and the 7th you should rest, so that your donkey should rest and your slave, male and female, should rest, and the stranger should be refreshed as well. So is that talking about 6 days? Is that a metaphor for the six days, years, or is that talking about Shabbos? So Rashi says, even on, he says it's talking about Shabbos, and it's telling us that even during Shemitah, there's still Shabbos. You might have thought if the whole year is Shabbos, what do you need Shabbos for? He says, no, even on the sabbatical year, there's an extreme Shabbos called Shabbos where you can't do any work. Not just you can't reap, you can't, sow either. You can't build Bob the Builder. The Ibn Ezra says that that is another poor person. They mentioned Shabbos because it's another thing that you should do for the poor. The next verse says 3 holidays you should have a year. So you had Shemitah, you had laws of the poor, the Shemitah, the sabbatical year. We're trying to understand the nature of the sabbatical years in this week's Parsha. And then we have the holidays. So then you say, well, what is Shemitah? Is Shemitah more like a holiday? It's like a big year where, it's like the COVID, everyone sits around and everyone stays home. I'm joking there. It's not a piece of cake here. But it is a national shutdown. It's like a holiday. Or is it more like Shabbos? Or is it more like charity? That's the question. And here, what's the answer in Parshat Mishpatim? In the first covenant that God makes with the Jews over the laws? Well, it's in the context of the poverty laws. It slides into the ethical aspect of Shabbos that the slave and the workers don't work, and then it slides into the holidays. Now, how are the holidays related? So it says as follows. You shouldn't swear falsely. And then it says you should keep the Chag HaMatzos, and the Pesach, and Chag HaKatzir, and the holiday of the reaping, Bikurei Masach, the first of your reaping, and Chag HaSif, the holiday of gathering. Now notice, Shemitah is an agricultural thing. The sabbatical year is agricultural, and so are Shavuos and Pesach. I'm sorry, Shavuos and Sukkot are also agricultural. 3 times a year should all appear in front of God. So let's think about that. Is there a connection there? The Shemitah year, nobody can work. On Pesach, Shavuot, and Sukkot, everyone has to go to Jerusalem. Is there a connection? Think about that. We'll come back to that later. Now, in Kitisa, it doesn't start with the sabbatical year. It starts with Pesach. In Kitisa, that's after the golden calf. God reiterates the laws, but slightly differently because things have changed a little bit. So he says as follows: to keep the Chag HaMatzos in the holiday of the Aviv. That means when the barley is getting started. So even Pesach has an agricultural element. That's why we wave the Omer on the second day of Pesach. It has to do with the barley harvest, as is discussed in the book of Ruth, the difference in the barley and the wheat harvest. So you should keep the Pesach when in the time of the barley harvest, that month, because that's when you went out of Egypt. And you should give the firstborn, right? So that's related to Pesach, the story of Pesach, firstborn animals. And you can't come to Jerusalem without anything. You got to bring something, bring the firstborn animals, bring another sacrifice. And then it says 6 days you should work, and the 7th day you should rest, and you should cease from the plowing and the harvest. Well, on Shabbos, you don't just cease from plowing and harvest. On Shabbos, you cease from all work. It says, do not do any work. But here it doesn't say that. It says 6 days you should work, and the 7th day you should rest, should stop, Shabbat. And also from plowing and reaping, you should stop. Now, the plowing and reaping, that's what I do in the sabbatical year. But it sounds like it's talking about Shabbos. So what is this verse talking about? So Rashi says, who's talking about that? Well, what are we talking about? The staying away from reaping and harvesting? That's not the only law of Shabbos. So some rabbis say that it's talking about that in addition to keeping the sabbatical year, right before the sabbatical year, you also can't reap certain things, telling you a special law about the sabbatical year. So in other words, it's talking about the sabbatical year. This verse is not talking about Shabbos. We talk about Pesach, and then it talks about the sabbatical year. Strange. Or no, it's talking about Pesach, and then it talks about Shabbos. So it says 6 days. So he says, this is how it works, says Rashi. 6 days you should work. On the 7th day you should rest. And those 6 days that I permitted you, there sometimes you can't even work on the sixth part. Even in the 6th year, there's still some prohibitions as you get closer to the last month before this sabbatical year. So then he says, some people say it's talking about Shabbos. And why does it say only reaping and plowing? Because the only thing you're not allowed to do on Shabbos is the reaping and plowing that you feel like doing. But that which you have to do, namely for cutting the omer, the measure of barley to wave on the 2nd day of Pesach, that could violate Shabbos. You're supposed to cut the omer on the 2nd day of Pesach, even if it's Shabbos. So in other words, this is talking about Shabbos. Or no, it's talking about the sabbatical year. So we had Pesach, sabbatical year, or Shabbos, or the agricultural aspect of Shabbos. And then, that's the Rashi. Ibn Ezra says, it doesn't talk about Shemitah. This chapter, unlike the previous chapter before the golden calf, talked about the sabbatical year. This chapter is not talking about the sabbatical year. It's talking about Shabbos. Because it's talking about the agricultural Shabbos, and I'm sorry, about Shabbos and the natural thing about Shabbos, and he gives some astronomical thing about it. But he thinks it's talking about Shabbos, that the Shemitah is not mentioned here, that there's an agricultural aspect of Shabbos, that's what's mentioned here. The Ramban says, it doesn't say Shemitah. He thinks this is not talking about the sabbatical year, because, again, he quotes the Ramban. The Bechor Shor says, during 6 days you to perform labor. Perhaps the reason why this is repeated once more, after all, we know about Shabbos. What do you have to tell me again? Because the Torah links it to agricultural work during the growing season and the plowing and harvesting. He's saying, we're talking about the Pesach, which is in the beginning of the harvest, and then Shavuos, which is in the later part of the harvest. So we mentioned Shabbos, which is also about, you got to be careful about, plowing and working on Shabbos. So for those who just arrived, we're trying to understand, what is the nature of Shemitah? This year, this parsha talks about the sabbatical year. What is that sabbatical year? Is it a yontif? Is it a Shabbos? Is it an ethical law for the poor people? What is it? So we're looking at different parts of the Torah, and we're trying to understand, what is it all about? So we're looking in Kittis, and there it throws in something either about Shabbos or about Shemitah right before Shavuos. And then it says Shavuos is the first of your reaping, and then you have Sukkos is the holiday of gathering. And by the way, 3 times a year you should come to see God, which means in Jerusalem. And when you conquer a lot of land, a lot of nations, and I make your boundaries very far, so it's going to be far from Jerusalem, don't worry about it. When you go away from Pesach, Shavuos, and Sukkos, you don't have to have an alarm at home. No one's going to steal your land. No one's going to desire your land when you go up to see God 3 times a year. So now it turns out that the holidays and Shemitah have a similarity. On the holidays, you have to take a trek to Jerusalem, which could take about a week. That's why you have a week-long Pesach, week-long Sukkot, and even Shavuos, you're allowed to bring sacrifices for a whole week. It's about a week, 10 days, you're going to be busy going back and forth to Jerusalem. Well, during that time, you can't work your field, and it's in the middle of the harvest. So actually, the holidays are a type of Shemitah too. They're also a type of sabbatical, because during the holidays, you can't work the land, and nobody's there. So the Torah tells you, don't worry about it. So we have a juxtaposition, a placement one next to the other of, in the first case, we had ethical laws, sabbatical, maybe Shabbos, holidays. This time we had Pesach, maybe a discussion of Shemitah, Shavuos, Sukkos, and the idea that Pesach, Shavuot, and Sukkos are also a time when you go away from your land. But don't worry, no one will steal it. In Leviticus, let's look at how the holidays are described there. It talks about Pesach, fine, you should eat matzahs, Fine, you have the first day, the seventh day, different sacrifices. And then it says, you come to Israel, you'll reap the grain and you'll bring the Omer. So you see, the Omer is also part of this agricultural thing. There's Pesach. And then the second day of Pesach, you have this agricultural thing that you have to wave some of the grain in front of some of the flour in front of God on the second day. And then you make a sacrifice with it. And then you're not allowed to eat the new grain until that day. So there's also a little bit of a shemitah. You can harvest as much as you want before Pesach, but you can't eat it until Pesach. And then you should count the 7 days and the 7 weeks like we do. We're counting the Omer until Shavuot. Then you bring a sacrifice on Shavuot. And on Shavuot, there's a special 2 breads that you bring, and chametz stick of bread, and there's certain sacrifices that are brought with that bread, fine. And then there's Shavuot, the holiday day, which we call Shavuot. And then it says, and when you cut your field, don't cut the corners, and give the droppings, the gleanings, don't pick them up. Leave it to the poor and the stranger. I am God and the Lord your God. So the Torah is talking about holidays, and in the context of Pesach, which has the Omer, which is agricultural sacrifice, and Shavuos, which is an agricultural 2 breads are brought as a sacrifice, as bikurim, the first fruits. In the context of that, it says, don't forget, leave the corner of your field for the poor. So the holidays are not unrelated to giving to the poor. Pesach is a time of reaping of the barley. You got to leave some for the poor. You got to leave the corner. You got to leave the gleanings. Shavuos is a time of reaping. You've got to leave the wheat for the poor, for the corners. It's the agricultural and the holidays are related. So then, if we say, is Shemitah, the sabbatical year, more like a Shabbos, or is it more like Yontif? Well, Yontif is all about leaving part of your field and your harvest for God. So Rashi says, why is it talking about this reaping over here? These are the laws of holidays, not the laws of reaping. Why do we have the laws of Peah, the laws of leaving the corner of the field in the middle of the discussion of Pesach and Shavuos? He says, well, in order that one who transgresses this, you violate 2 scriptures. So he quotes a rabbi. What reason has Scripture to place the laws of the corner of the field in the laws of the festivals? Pesach, Shavuos, and then it goes to Rosh Hashanah Yom Kippur. So he says to teach you that he who leaves the gleanings, the forgotten sheaf, is regarded as though he had built the Beis Hamikdash and offered sacrifices. The answer is not as good as the question. But the question is, what are the laws of agriculture doing in the middle of the holidays? So God is telling you, all right, the holidays are one thing. That's part of it, part of Judaism. The other part is you got to give charity. That's why we have Yizkor. Yizkor is not only to remember the dead, it's to give charity in memory of the dead. That on Yontif, when you have a nice steak, you got to give $20 to the synagogue or whoever to acknowledge that at a time when we are spending money, you should leave some for the poor. That's what holidays are about. So now when we ask in Exodus, why was Shemitah mentioned with the holidays? Because Shemitah is about the poor, that you leave your field, the poor can come and take as much fruit as they want, as much wheat as they want. And holidays are also about that, especially Shavuos and Shavuos, Sukkot, and Pesach too. Not the first day, but the second day of Pesach. Ibn Ezra says, when you reap the harvest, we must not forget the commandments at that time of year. So it's particularly important during the holiday season, which is all about reaping, because the holidays are very agriculturally based, to not forget the poor at that time. The Bechor Shor, one of the French rabbis, says, from Shavuos and on, it's the time of reaping. So you've got to tell people about leaving the gleanings. Okay, now we go to this week's parsha. After all, the topics we pitch for our Monday classes are related to the weekly parsha. Thursday we'll discuss the parsha more directly. So what's the context of Shemitah? How is it presented? Is it presented as a matter of charity? Is that what Shemitah is about? It's a matter of rest of the land. The land should rest. That you don't really own the land. Is it about you, or is it about the poor? Is it a holiday? Is it a Shabbos? That's the question. So let's look in our parsha. In our parsha, it doesn't really talk so much about Shabbos, although the last sentence in our parsha is, "Et Shabtotai Tishmoru." keep the Shabbos, all my Shabboses. There may be more than one Shabbos. There's regular Shabbos that we know and love. The sabbatical year is a type of Shabbos. Maybe even the holidays are a type of Shabbos. After all, that conclusion of our Parsha is also perhaps a conclusion of last week's Parsha, which mentioned all the holidays. So I don't want to just present this week's Parsha without remembering that not too many verses ago in last week's Parsha, we mentioned all the holidays from Shabbos, Pesach, Shavuos, Rosh Hashanah, Yom Kippur, Sukkos in last week's Parsha. So we can't forget that once again, in this law book, this covenant which God makes with us, and the second Parsha this week is about the covenant that you have to keep the commandments. If we don't, we're in trouble. In this covenant in Leviticus is similar to the covenant that was made at Mount Sinai before the golden calf in Parshat Mishpatim, which we read, and after the golden calf in Parshat Kitisa, which we read, in which you have holidays and then Shemitah is mentioned. And when it talks about Shemitah, what's the context? So it says this Shabbat should be for you to eat. You enjoy it too. You don't have to work. Whatever grows, grows. You take it. And also for your slaves. Torah did not abolish slavery, but it did a heck of a lot of things to diminish it so that the slave has a lot of different rights. And one of them is he gets a year off, he gets a day off, and he gets a year off. And your workers, the people who are the schnorrers who come around to sell a few wares, they get a break. Anybody who's a garimimach, people who are not really citizens, who live here, they don't have landless people, they get a break, they can take whatever they want. And for the animals also, they can eat whatever they want. It's also for them. Shabbos, the regular Shabbos, is to rest animals, and the Shemitah is the sabbatical year is also to rest the animal. And you should count 7 years, 7 times, and these 7 times should be 49 years, and then the 50th year, that's a different lecture. Is the Jubilee year similar to the Shemitah, or is it a different thing? Both of them, you can't work the field, but in one of them, the slaves go free. So and your land goes back to its original owner. If you sold your ancestral land, it comes back to you on the Jubilee year, but not in the sabbatical year. So they're different, they're similar. And on Yom Kippur, you blow the shofar. So it's interesting, the Jubilee year is intertwined with Yom Kippur, with one of the holidays. It's Yom Kippur that the slaves go free. But the holiday, the Jubilee year should start on Rosh Hashanah. So why are you blowing the trumpet on Rosh Hashanah, on Yom Kippur? So the rabbi says there's like a 10 days where the slave sits around, he bosses you around. He says, hey, can I have a cup of coffee? Hey, by the way, before I go, do you think I can have that tchotchke over there? I always like that tchotchke. So the slave has a 10-day limbo before Yom Kippur. Also, another holiday that's connected with Shemitah is that on either it looks like it's on the sabbatical year or the month after the sabbatical year, you gather all Jews, men, women, and children to Jerusalem, and the king reads the Torah. So Sukkos is also related to the sabbatical year. So the holidays and Jubilee year and the sabbatical year, they're intertwined with the holidays. They're special times like holidays. Anyway, let's go on. Then what does it say? You should sanctify the 50th year. So the sabbatical year is a little different from Shabbos, because Shabbos is automatic. Even if I didn't count Shabbos, it would still be Shabbos. If no Jews kept track of Pesach, there wouldn't be Pesach, because you have to figure out when it is. You have to figure out how many days in this month, how many days in that month, when's Rosh Chodesh. The same thing with the sabbatical year, especially the Jubilee year, has to be counted by the court. To think about that, does Shemitah happen automatically, or is it because of the counting of the court? Is it only the Jubilee year? That's because of the counting of the court. Anyway, on the Jubilee year, you go back to your inheritance, and you're not allowed to plant or reap in the Jubilee year. So it's similar to the sabbatical year. Everybody has the field, everyone goes home, and then the Torah goes into ethical laws again. Just like in Exodus, we said the ethical laws of Parshat Mishpatim, you shouldn't lie, you shouldn't cheat, you shouldn't take bribery, you should give charity, you should lend money to the poor, and you have the sabbatical year where the poor people could take the field, and you have the holidays, which are also agricultural, you also have to give to the poor, and you have Shabbos where the slaves get a break, get a day off. So too over here, after the sabbatical year is discussed, it talks about helping the poor. When you're selling something, don't afflict people. Don't charge them too much. So it tells you how to make a calculation, etc. Don't afflict people. And then it says, then things will be good if you keep these laws, and don't sell the land forever. And then later, I don't have the verses here, it mentions that that if someone loses his land, you as a cousin should try to buy it back, or somebody who knows him should try to buy it back and give the family back their ancestral land so they can make a living on the land. So the ethical laws and the sabbatical year are deeply connected and rooted once again. So in Bahar, in this week's Parsha, it's framed that a few verses before that talks about the holidays. So it's similar to the holidays. It sort of sounds like Shabbos, but it doesn't mention Shabbos. At the end of the Parsha, it says, keep the Sabbath. And it sounds very much like ethical laws because half of Parshat Bahar is about the sabbatical year and the Jubilee year, and the other half is about trying to redeem things for your poor brother who came on hard times. But if you ask the medieval commentators, all right, what's the reason for Shemitah? The Sefer HaChinuch has 613 mitzvot, and he gives the root, the meaning of every single mitzvah. So he says, what's the root for Shemitah? He says, I don't have to write it again. Look in the laws of lending to the poor. For the Sefer HaChinuch, sabbatical year is totally about ethical laws. It's totally about the poor. What did he say regarding the laws of lending? The root of the commandment is that God wanted his creations to be trained and habituated in the trait of kindness and mercy, since it's a praiseworthy trait. And from the refinement of their bodies, good character traits, they will be fit to receive the good. So it's not so much about the poor. You see, charity is not always about the poor. It's about the rich, that the rich have an obligation to the poor to train themselves. So, you can frame it either way, but he frames it in terms of the rich, that it's about developing the character of the rich person. And when God blesses you, then he desires that you do good with that blessing. And if we're not from this angle of this root, it was God's kindness that God wanted to support the poor through other people. Why did God make him poor? So that you would help him. It's your job, et cetera, et cetera. So the Sefer HaChinuch believes that the sabbatical year is totally in the realm of the context of the very first introduction of the Shemitah. Rambam and the Mishnah, they list the laws of sabbatical year in the laws of Zraim, the agricultural laws. What are the agricultural laws? Meiser, give 1/10 to the landless Levite. Truma, give 2% to the landless Kohen. Gifts to the poor, charity. Laws of tzedakah. So the Rambam includes in the laws of sabbatical year also that the Levites don't get any cities. They don't get any land. They only get cities, and that anybody can, at the end of the laws of a particular law, the Rambam often gives a full philosophical statement. So he says anybody can be a Levi. Anybody who wants to become a servant of God and to say he doesn't want to work, he just wants to be holy of holies. Hopefully God will help him make a living in this world. And just like the Kohanim and Leviim, they don't work, and God provides for them. Again, the Rambam also says somewhere else that you're not allowed to throw yourself on the community and say, I'm holy, pay for my living. But here he says that hopefully if you want to be holy, God will provide a living from somewhere and you'll be okay. So I'm not going to get into the philosophical question of whether you should, throw yourself in the community or not. The Rambam is very much against throwing yourself in the community because you're so holy. But here, the Rambam, what interests me here is the idea that he views the Shemitah as a way of removing ourselves from the mundane and making a year that's completely holy. Just like Shabbos is a holy day within our week, every 7 years, you can sort of be like a Levite. You don't work, and you're just to get dedicated to God. So for the Rambam, I would say Shemitah is more of, in the one hand, it's part of the agricultural laws. It's about kindness to the poor, because that's where it's codified. And number two, it's about dedicating yourself to God. Like what? Like Shabbos. So the Meshech Chochmah, more recent commentator, Meir Simcha Dvinsk, over 100 years ago. So he said, it says that the sabbatical year is a Shabbos to God. So just like Shabbos is a Shabbos to God. But he says, I think that just like Shabbos is different than Yontif, because Shabbos comes every week, no matter what. Even if there were no Jews in the world, it'd still be Shabbos. But Yontif depends on the Jews. We have to have a Jews who make a calendar. Unless the ASB puts out the calendar, you don't know when Pesach's going to be. You don't know when Shavuos is going to be. So it depends on us. So too, the sabbatical year is different from the Jubilee year. They're similar, but the Jubilee year depends on us, but not Shemitah. It's holy by itself. God declares, seventh year, everything belongs to anybody. Your olive grove is not your olive grove. It has nothing to do with the Jews. The Jews could be in total denial of it. It's still the sabbatical year. So he believes that the Shemitah year has a little more similarity to Shabbos, not to Yontif. So we raised the question, what is the nature of the sabbatical year? Is it more of is the sabbatical year more of is it more of a Yontif, or is it more of just simply an ethical law to help the poor? Of course, it has elements of all three, but if we look at each parsha, it had sort of a different take on it, because you can look at it in different ways. It's like looking at a diamond, and you say, oh, you look at it over here, it looks kind of green. Look at it from that side, it looks a little gold or purple. So too, we're going to look at the sabbatical year. If you look at the first parsha, so it mentions Shemitah first. It's one of the prime ethical laws. It's primarily an ethical law. As the Sefer HaChinuch said, you want to know the reason for Shemitah? It's the same as the reason for charity. Then we have, and it's also connected to Shabbos and the holidays, but mostly the ethical. Then we had another section where we're in the middle of the discussion of the holidays. It says something which might be connected, a verse that might be referring to Shemitah, that Shemitah is really part of the holidays. As we said, don't forget that the Jubilee year starts on Yom Kippur, and at the end of the Shemitah year, you gather everyone together for a big religious celebration for when the king reads the Torah on the Hakel, the big gathering on Sukkot. The year and Sukkot are connected. So from that perspective, it's a time for God. And don't forget that the holidays are more like Shemitah than you think, because in the holidays, everyone leaves their land and goes to Jerusalem. And they have to leave their land fallow. And it's a big sacrifice. It's a test. Shemitah is a test. Can Jews not work for a year and see what happens? Depend on God. Again, in the olden days, we lived very close with God, and one day we'll restore that closeness with God. And when Jews do good things, there would be automatic reward. Today, we live in a world where God is more obscure. It's hard to get learn Torah all day. This is going to be magical. Income is going to come flying at me. But if all the Jews were doing things, you could imagine such a world. Then we saw the laws of reaping were embedded in the holiday of Pesach Shavuos. Pesach and Shavuos are very much about reaping. So in that sense, the sabbatical year is sort of an extension of Pesach Shavuos and the laws of reaping. And then we saw in Parshat Bahar that it's connected a little bit to the Jubilee year, perhaps. It sounds a lot like Shabbos. It's mentioned at the end of Parshat Bahar, it says Shabbos again because it's connected. It's just after the list of the holidays, you have all the holidays, and then you have Shemitah, sort of inverse of the Exodus. In Exodus, you have Shemitah and then the holidays. In Vayikra, everything's inverse, as my rabbis at Yeshivat Har Tzion pointed out. It's inverse. You have the holidays and then the Shemitah year. And then we pointed out that in Parshat Bahar, the end of the Parsha speaks about ethical laws, that if someone falls on hard times, you got to bail them out, redeem them, get them out of slavery. So it's all about helping the poor, and in that sense, these laws are framed in that context. I would mention one other thing. If you look at the verses before Parshat Bahar, the end of the Parsha is also about ethical laws, What happens if you kill someone? What happens if you hurt someone's animal, etc. And in that sense, also framing the Shemitah as part of the ethical code. It's all connected. The Shabbos, ethics, Yom Tov, Sabbatical Year, it's all connected to our ethics, to our relation to the poor. There are no silos. There's no big division or distinction. It's all connected. One is connected to the other. The Walgreens and Kroger's and all that didn't have to have a weekend shift. Okay, just picture how much better life would be if you had some sort of a blue law. And again, as Jews, we don't like blue laws because you can't work on Saturday, Sunday, and you can't work on Saturday. But to have the idea that workers entitled to a day off is something that even the ACLU hasn't achieved yet. It's something that the Torah achieved. It's a year off, it's a day off, there are holidays off. The workers have a right to be human and to feel and to just be for part of the time. And even a rich person has the right to stop being a rich moneymaker and to stop and just enjoy the olives and the grain and the things he has, go out in the field and take a few pieces of grain and make a few breads, and not to have to be a great producer for that year to the whole world is sitting on his shoulders. You don't have to worry about it. You want food? Go to the field and take for yourself. So it's really about liberation of human being. It's in that sense, it's similar to the Jubilee year, where you proclaim liberty throughout the land. All these laws are about liberty. It's about giving freedom to the human being. So that's our discussion. And who would like to comment, question, share some personal thoughts? Welcome them at this time. Don't forget to unmute yourself.
I'll say thank you, Rabbi.
That's true.
Thank you, Rabbi.
But, I think it's an important lesson that the
thank you,
religion is
Rabbi.
really all about ethics. It's all connected. It's all connected. And also sometimes to give ourselves a Shabbos. We ourselves have human rights, not just our workers. We ourselves have a right to rest.